Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mia Dev Radio. So, today I'm not alone. I am with Maximilian from GitHub, and my name is Leboham Madise, and we'll be focusing on increasing developer productivity. But before we kick off, I'm going to give our guest an opportunity for him to introduce himself. Warm welcome, Max.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the short introduction, and I'm very pleased to join you here today for a very nice little session about how software developer experience can really help a business, but also the world thrive and evolve.
Yeah, so um, maybe before we kick off into the slides, Max, please let everyone know where you're joining us from. So I'm joining you from Pretoria, South Africa, and I'm an Azure Go-to-Market Manager at Microsoft, and my handle on GitHub is FruityMo.
Yeah, I'm Max. Hi, I'm joining here from Germany as a GitHub solutions engineer. That means I help people tailor our technical products and what GitHub can do to the needs that they have in their project. And I'm joining from Germany, from Würzburg in Germany, which is right in the middle of Germany, basically. It's a nice little region with good wines, maybe not as good as South African wines, but it's very nice to join you today here.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Over to you. Please kick off.
Definitely. Thank you. Right. Let's maybe start off with a few words about GitHub. So, when people talk about GitHub, everyone thinks of this open source community. But many people actually forget the size at which this open source community has grown. Right? It started off with a couple of people in the late 2010s with a small repository hosting for open source projects to facilitate cooperation. Today, when we look at the community, we have 100 million and more people developing together source code in enterprises, in the open source, and it's just growing at a breathtaking pace. Since I joined, I think we gained more than 30 million additional developers on the platform. And it really brings together the entire world of software development in this one collaborative space. And this collaborative space is also exactly what we want to talk about today. Because, of course, it's not just the world building software on GitHub, the world at the same time is meeting new challenges every day. We're seeing new global and local challenges. That is stuff like cybersecurity threats that are, facing developers, that are facing companies developing digital products. We're also seeing new emerging patterns, stuff like competitors that earlier only competed, now having to work together to solve business problems together, to really cooperate on the solutions that they create. At the same time, in many countries, the population is aging, and you are encountering workforce shortages of the people that have the qualifications that you need to continue innovating. The market expects you as a company to innovate, but at the same time, how will you meet this need when you are already faced with all of these challenges? Software is a key part of all of that, and that's sort of where GitHub comes in here. We are thinking if you focus on the right things, then you can actually help innovate faster, stay innovative, and even increase the pace of innovation compared to what you have today. And we have one disruptive thought of how you might do this. It's not by pressuring your developers more. No, it's instead of focusing on the experience of your developers. So helping your software developers, the people that create the software, the innovation, that really solve these global challenges, to do their best work. And what we mean by this best work is that we actually have to look at it holistically. It's not just providing your developer a basket of fruits and giving them a nice IDE and letting them work, even though that is surely also part of it, right? It's really looking at the whole picture. It's looking at where does developer productivity and creativity come in and actually help you as a business in the world, and also helps your developers be more joyful at work.
Yeah.
So,
So I really like what you said, Max, around, you know, focusing on the right things, and then actually giving an example by saying, when you say the right things, you actually mean people, you know?
Exactly.
And I know a lot of companies are today adopting DevOps practices, and one of the key elements there is people, you know. So I'm really looking forward to learning more, especially with regards to, you know, the well-being of developers. You know, whilst we want them to be productive and build faster, it's also important to be mindful about their well-being.
Exactly. I mean, in the end, it's always a combination, right? As a developer, you want to have the latest tools, but at the same time, you want to have an organization structure that also supports you and enables you to use them to the full potential. You don't want to run into any process problems, you know, any hurdles that you need to overcome before you can actually realize your innovation. You want to just start innovating, right? You want to focus on that and not be stuck in some process. And with that exact thought, I want to also introduce the first thing that we should look at when we talk about developer experience and how that can help face these challenges. And that is, we need a measure to see how does our team perform, how does our organization perform with regards to productivity of developers. And by productivity, we don't just look at, you know, measures like, okay, how often do you commit, or how many lines of code do you produce? But here with the SPACE framework, it's a framework that was developed together by Microsoft Research, GitHub Research, and the University of Victoria. We're looking at the holistic picture. So this is really proposing a set of metrics across an entire spectrum to measure different aspects of the developer experience. Let's dive right in. What does SPACE stand for? SPACE is basically an abbreviation of the different dimensions that we want to look at. It's satisfaction and well-being first, right? Then we look at performance. So, for example, how often, how long does it take us to review code reviews? Activity, you know, how frequent, like how many code reviews do we have in a given time frame? Communication and collaboration, also that is a measure that does not necessarily have to be quantitative. It can also be qualitative. And then finally, efficiency and flow. And the special thing about this framework of metrics, and we're going to go into a bit more detail for each of them in a second, but the special thing here is we're not just trying to measure technical performance indicators. What we are trying to measure, what we're proposing you also measure in your organization, is that you actually go out and ask your customers, for example, hey, how did this last ship drive your business value, for example? Or you go to your developers and you say, hey, how satisfied do you feel at work? How focused can you stay at work? Do you feel like you're constantly getting disrupted while you're trying to write your code? So this is really more of a holistic set of measures that we want to propose to measure the efficiency. Right, let's dive right in. Satisfaction and well-being. We're going to go through them very quickly here and just propose a couple of metrics so you can get a better understanding of what we really do mean by that and how you can measure that. So employee satisfaction, developer efficiency, engagement. These are things where you could, for example, create a questionnaire with your developers and repeatedly evaluate how these trends are developing, and also recognize that if something, you know, is dragging down the satisfaction of your developers, that's really something you should also measure and take care of and reduce that to make sure that people can really find creative new solutions to the problems they're facing. At the same time, if we look at performance, you know, of course, this is more of a technical set of indicators that we're looking at, but in the end, this is really about measuring outcomes. So it is, we agree, like, this is hard, right? It's not easy to say, look at this one number and this will be a perfect indicator for your performance. But in the end, stuff like service health, meeting the SLOs, that could be something that you can measure and that you can actually visualize and track as one suggested metric there. Activity, what we mean here is, for example, as I said, these operational activities like code reviews. If you look at that, how often do you code review? How often do your code reviews fail, for example? These could be metrics that you can look at in the activity space. And for communication and collaboration, this is really about, for example, how long does it take after a pull request is marked ready for review until it is integrated, for example. So you really see if this communication view, like pull request review is a communication piece inside of your development team, right? How long is that taking? Maybe you should look at communication patterns in your company. If it takes really long for people, to reply to each other in the communication streams, maybe something is not efficient there. Maybe you can improve something there. And finally, we also have efficiency and flow, and that is again something where it's maybe a bit harder to measure it in solely quantitative terms, but qualitatively, if you create a questionnaire and ask your developers, hey, do you feel that you can stay in the flow, that you can focus on what you're working on? Are you getting the stuff done that you want to do? You can measure that with questionnaires again.
Yeah. So, Max, I have a question. When you were at the P element of space, you spoke about burnout. How do we measure a developer's burnout? Like how can one catch that to make sure that they can help them? Yeah.
I think measuring. I know it stood on the slide, but maybe measuring burnout is not really a metric that you can put into a number, right? You're not 70% burnt out. You can't attach an API route to some development tool and then it says, oh, your developers are 200% more burnt out than last time we checked. But what you can do is take these metrics, right? These self-assessment questionnaires, for example, and then also scope them towards the mental well-being of the developers. I mean, software development is a stressful job, right? You have a long backlog that you never can get ahead of, and people put in more and more hours in order to try and fix that stuff. You have a ship on a Friday that maybe blows up on a Saturday, and suddenly you have to go back into this work context and you need to fix it. And this can of course be taxing. So you should also keep an eye out on this holistic factor, on this mental well-being of your developers, because what we see is that when a developer is happier, they produce more, better, and more helpful code and innovations that in the end help the world, right? So that's how you should look at the thing. Right. Also, coming back to this, it's not necessary, of course, if you wanted to follow the SPACE framework. We do have a link in the comments about the original research paper, and there's a lot of detail in there how you can apply this to your organization. We don't want to suggest you need to necessarily pick one of these metrics from every category and across every dev, so not necessarily at the organization, team, and individual level. You can pick maybe 3, 4, 5 of these metrics from the different spectrum and combine them into a few that helps you, is applicable to your organization, and that you can modify, picking from these metrics, continuously adapting to what you see are currently challenges. So it's not trying to pretend that we have this one incredible measure that gives you a SPACE score and then, I am a SPACE score of 7 and my organization is very efficient. But we're trying to guide you towards becoming a more developer-friendly organization. Another thing that can help you become more developer-friendly is inner sourcing. So as GitHub, of course, we are the home of open source, right? As we saw before, 100 million developers are coming together every day to create solutions that in the end propel the world forward. When we're looking at open source, it is an emergent behavior, right? It is a system that has been created by people being willing to cooperate together freely, picking projects that they find engaging, modifying them, enhancing them, and then also creating their own organizational structures, basically with maintainers and having pull requests and having this sort of community interaction. It was an organic emergent behavior, right? And when you look at that, you can take learnings from this and apply that also inside of your company, inside of your enterprise. So you want to give your developers a space for free collaboration where they can work together on projects of their choice to contribute the innovations that they would like to see inside of your company. This could be product features. This could be something where if you allow to really inner source, so to collaborate on all repositories, not just the ones from the one project team that the developer is maybe originally in. This one developer that might be a backend developer, if they see that the company website, for example, is not efficiently loading the data from the backend, okay, since it's inner sourced, you can go into the website backend, which is not at all related to his daily work, still suggest a change, still should suggest a new innovation there, and help avoid any issues across the entire portfolio. At the same time, you can also avoid repetition. So for example, if you have 15 different business units and every business unit writes their own logging system, that is not efficient, right? You really only need one logging system in the end, right? And if you build that out, you can have the best possible logging system contributed to by these 15 business units. Right.
And so I love the fact that it also removes the silos within big organizations. You know, the more organizations start embracing inner sourcing, the more collaboration can happen internally, you know, and as a result also improve their productivity. But apart from code reusage, one thing that comes to me top of mind as you've outlined inner sourcing is, you know, actual practices. Because if each team, let's say, building on your example of a login page, if they used their own way, you know, like maybe one team is applying a login that's tied to a database, whereas other people are using OAuth, it means from a practice perspective, they're not following either a guideline internally that recommends, hey, this is how we would want to engage with maybe this access with, of pieces of data, you know. So I think this code reuse and cross org collaboration also enforces standards, you know, practices within the organization to be defined.
This definitely helps. Maybe it is not a means to an end to enforce certain standards, but it definitely helps when you have people move, you know, longitudinally between projects and bringing the knowledge that they have from one project, like which best practice worked best in a login module, for example. They can see, you know, other projects might be doing something where they think, oh, maybe that's not the best way to do it. Let me propose a pull request of how I think you could do it, and that has a couple of benefits, right? And you transfer that internal knowledge from one project to the other that would never have talked to in the past, you know, that would have no way of communicating in the past, or that would have even no visibility into the engineering challenges. So that's also super exciting. And I mean, in the end, this all helps, of course, you know, bringing more productivity into companies. So what we see is an increase in productivity, a tremendous increase in productivity for companies that allow inner sourcing. For example, one big customer that has publicly shared also their inner sourcing programs is Philips. Philips, the huge electronic company, right? They have inner sourced 85% of their source code. So 85%, it's like basically all of it, because what we often hear from companies when you start talking about inner sources, oh, this would never work in our company. Our business units are much too entrenched. You know, we cannot just break up the barriers between business units. This would lead to absolute mayhem, code leakage, and whatever. But when you actually start looking at it, you can implement sensible guidelines. You can implement sensible limitations, but still allow your developers internally, your employees, to work across different projects. And if you establish the right framework, of course, it needs to be tailored to your company, to your market, but then you can really get a successful inner source program out of the door. And as you then see, it's like 85% in a company like Philips that can be shared internally. And that is really, really exciting.
So Max, another question. You mentioned how some organizations think that it might not work because of how their current architecture is entrenched per team, maybe. I think one of the concerns they might be around governance of the actual source code and ensuring that maybe things don't get corrupted by accident. Is there security in place that, you know, that can help one promote inner sourcing with a belief that, okay, we can do it in a safe way without maybe one team breaking another team's code base, you know?
Definitely. So there's a combination of factors that can help with that. For one, of course, you should use automated builds like CI/CD systems that can show you within a pull request before that even gets merged into the productive variant of the code base, that can show you if that still conforms to all of the test cases that you have formally defined. At the same time, also code review practices and guidelines that you can set up, for example, specifically inside of GitHub, since it was built for this open source interaction model, right? You can specifically enforce the pull request flow, and you can say, look, repositories in general, they have, for example, a maintaining team. If people from other teams come in there and want to work on that repository, what they can do is not directly modify the code in the repo. They can only create a fork of that and then open a pull request from the fork to the main repo, so the maintainers can keep their version of the code safe and clean. And also what we're going to look at later is GitHub Advanced Security as one part of really making the code secure. But more on that later, maybe. Definitely. One other part of friction which you might also encounter when you come to inner source and you want to have developers move across all of these different projects is not organizational friction, but also technical friction. So as a developer, you might know when you are working on a project that has the same general tool chain as what you're usually working in, but maybe a different version of it. So it's maybe a bit of an older project and that is still on, I don't know, Node 12, for example. And then you've set everything up on another version of Node, and now you could use NVM, but maybe something breaks in the course of switching the versions, and all of the other build tools and dependencies, you need to also set them up then again. And that can create a lot of friction. We have another solution that is built to counter this technical friction, and that's called Codespaces. What it is basically a virtual developer environment that runs inside of the cloud that you can just spin up. You have a software, a code file inside of the repository that defines exactly which service containers does it need, which ports need to be shared, which base image should be used for this development workspace. So which version of Node, for example, should be installed, which version of Java should be installed, which other third-party build tools should be integrated into this workspace. And you define that in a code file. And then as soon as you have that, everyone who comes into the repository to work on your code can just spin up a code space with one click, and within seconds, they can start coding within that framework. So this is really something that can accelerate your onboarding tremendously. So if you have new developers joining your projects, but it can also help reduce this inner source friction, this friction of moving between different projects and giving you always a clean, fresh working environment that you can create code in. Colleagues of mine are going to give a more in-depth dive on that.
Yeah. So one thing I do love about Codespaces, Max, is that it also enables developers whose physical machines might not have, the computing power to have the actual installations for the code base, So it enables them to still be able to contribute to the code base on the web. So for me, this is the biggest game changer ever, because I know some limitations that people have. If it's not computing power, it's storage, because some of these SDKs are pretty large, So this is really a game changer.
Definitely. And you can really scale up the performance to tremendous measures. So one example is the entire GitHub engineering team is using Codespaces to build GitHub itself. So since GitHub is also inner sourcing heavily, I could go into the GitHub repository right now, and within 10 seconds spin up a new code space and then run GitHub inside of that code space, because we can just tailor the machine to have enough power to run the entirety of GitHub within that code space. And it's all pre-configured, all dependencies, all databases, everything is pre-configured. Within 10 seconds, you have a development environment for such a complex project with 14 gigabytes of just code base, right? So this is how powerful this can make even your 2-core machine that you have at home. In theory, you can code from your iPad. So this is insane, right? And it is also very useful for companies. So it's not just that we internally see this. This is one quote from a company that has rolled out Codespaces, and they also see it exactly as we have envisioned it, versus taking 2 weeks to set up your entire tool chain. For them now, it's a simple step. You click inside of the GitHub UI, you click on create new code space, and then off you go. It's like you have the entire development environment set up within seconds. And that's really how you can also bring your ideas faster into production, right? You don't need to worry about tool chains. You always have a clean working environment. You can customize it with your plugins, but the base definition is always given. It's always clean. You create new code across different repositories, different projects, and you don't need to worry about anything. What we mentioned before, what some people might worry about, though, is the aspect of security. And I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about this. Like, one of the global challenges that we mentioned right in the beginning is cybersecurity, right? Hackers attacking products, hacking online platforms. That's one of the main threat vectors, right? Being taken over in cloud platforms, since we're moving increasingly into online platforms. That is where attacks are happening. And we are very aware of this. I mean, in the end, we have this huge open source platform. And over time, a lot of tokens got leaked into that. So if you looked at any hacker conference, there was always a little talk somewhere where they said, we scanned GitHub and we found so and so many cloud tokens, and we tried them out, and it turns out 20% of them were still active, and it turns out we can now take over a big corporation access Azure instance, for example. So that is something that we looked at and said, look, that doesn't sound very good. And if we put the numbers behind it, we can also see that. Yes.
Yeah. Before you deep dive, I just want to understand, in the previous slide, you say unabrasive security. What do you mean by unabrasive?
That is a very good question. So this entire conversation we're having is to see how reducing the friction for developers in all parts of the process can help accelerate this innovation, right? So what we're going to get to is to see how GitHub thinks we can create this secure solution, this secure development environment as a base foundation for your platform without getting in the way of the developers. So
I see.
Many security tools, if you're using them today, they're spamming you basically with a lot of false positives that you need to look at, that you need to handle, and that bring you out of the development flow. And also, oftentimes what they do is they raise it on another platform. So your project gets scanned, the scan results come in, you might get a spreadsheet with 500 findings in it, or you might get an email that, hey, you should log into secondary platform so-and-so and look at the results there. At GitHub, what we're doing is we're looking at how can we make this as smooth for developers as possible, so as unobtrusive as possible, integrated into the pull request, integrated into the entirety of the GitHub platform, and make it very, very easy to understand what is going on. So we're putting it in plain language for the developer, and we're covering different areas of the security aspect. So, for example, something most developers know, Dependabot, right? Dependency insights. This is stuff where we can really help get an overview for companies, for example. We get an overview of what are you depending on. We're also having that, of course, in the open source. This is all freely available on the open source, but for companies especially, this is, of course, a big front of mind thing. Understand what are we depending on? Is that stuff vulnerable? If it is vulnerable, which version is vulnerable? Where are we using this version? How can we fix this? And for that, we have created proactive systems like Dependabot, for example, for security updates and SBOM generation to understand also what is part of a software version. So we have all of these things in the area of SCA, and it's integrated into the platform to not interrupt you as a developer, but instead as a friendly assistant that basically creates a new pull request for you, or that highlights within the GitHub UI a little pop-up and says like, look, we have a new security finding. And it's really unobtrusive there. At the same time, we also have seen in the previous slide, most attacks happen through the leakage of cloud tokens in source code. That is not good, right? It's somewhere inside of the source code. The developer might even delete it and put another comment there. But in the end, this does not really reliably remove the threat, because attackers can also scan the entirety of the Git history. And what we've done is basically integrated a secret scanning module. That's what we call it. It's scanning the entire code base for secrets. And then if we find anything, we give you also insights on, hey, what kind of a secret is this? Is this an Azure Cloud token? Is this a GCP token? Is this an Artifactory token? And we're highlighting what kind of a token is it? Where did we find it? Is that still active? And we're giving the developers the help to understand what happened here and to revoke that. And lastly, our code scanning engine, so a static application security tester, is tailored not to produce false positives. So this is like one of the main design goals, was to make it not produce a lot of false positives, because we know that when developers get 500 findings, they won't fix a single one. But if they get 3, that's pretty sure that they will fix the 3 ones. And we see that also in the results. So when we look at the effect of making the security aspect developer friendly, we can see that we increase the fix rate tremendously. Like if you look at that, after 1 week for a regular security finding, usually you have 15% of them fixed. But with our system, by integrating it in a developer-friendly way that maximizes the developer experience, we get to 72%. Like this is the difference by giving developers really a nice tool to work with versus giving them a tool that creates friction.
Amazing.
Yes. And I always love hearing from people that are using these tools and rolling them out, how quickly it actually helps, make an impact.
Yeah. So some of the tools I've used is, the Dependabot.
Yes.
So it would run like a GitHub action, just scanning my code, letting me know of any vulnerabilities. And it's actually quite, it taught me a lot. And I think it has also improved, my developer experience, because now I'm being mindful of things that previously I didn't think about, So the whole concept of security by design when you build is sort of now gradually being integrated into how I think and how I approach things. And earlier you also mentioned secrets. So I really loved how GitHub is helping people protect themselves, even with any code base that they put on GitHub. It would scan your code even for password and actually realize, hey, you should make recommendations and say, hey, you should consider storing this in a secret, or maybe if, let's say, your subscription details are being exposed, it would say, hey, consider using GitHub secrets. And one thing I learned is that if, let's say, you store a password in a GitHub secret and you say, for example, echo the secret, it won't print it back to you, so that's how secure it is, which is really quite impressive.
Exactly. One note about the passwords. If you want to filter for specific passwords, what you would have to do is specific passwords are not completely supported by the secret scanner yet. But what you can do is, for example, input your own custom patterns. So your own patterns that would, for example, scan in JSON files for the string password or pass or credential.
Yeah.
And then if there's actually a value attached to that, so you could highlight whatever you want that is scanned for inside of your entire code base. And this other aspect about the secrets echoing, that is actually something that I also find incredibly cool. So if you are using GitHub secret storage and you're using a GitHub action and you would, for example, try to print that accidentally somewhere to the console, it would just censor the secrets from the secret vault. So definitely also a very cool feature. Let's maybe continue on with the more exciting feature, like the most exciting feature that we currently likely have. It's GitHub Copilot. So I think everyone might have come across this already, but I still am mind blown when I'm using this every day for my development on the side. It's the AI coding assistant of our dreams. And the beautiful thing is, of course, when we're talking about GitHub Copilot, oftentimes we are talking about how much more productive does this make you as developers? How much more innovation can you push as developers? But what I also love to talk about with Copilot is if we look at Copilot and we remember the SPACE framework from earlier in the presentation, we can evaluate Copilot using the SPACE framework. And when we do that, when we go to the developers and we ask them, look, performance, how much faster do you feel? Efficiency and flow, perceived productivity or satisfaction. We see numbers like these. We see people love it because it helps them be more satisfied with work. It's not just about outputting more code or increasing productivity alone. It's really helping developers be more creative. It's helping them stay in a flow state. So this is something that many people don't even think about when they think about AI generated code. It's really about also enhancing the developer experience and giving the people the time to focus on these larger issues, to focus on architectural decisions, to focus on the business logic, to focus on the the core innovations that you need to bring out to improve the entirety of the platform. And if you look at the other metrics from efficiency and flow or satisfaction and well-being, we see also here people are less frustrated when coding. I mean, this is stuff like, for example, when you are trying to create a new API route and you're using a new framework, maybe you're just learning still this library, to use this library, and you don't yet perfectly know which input format it expects. Oftentimes, Copilot will already know this library and it will be able to suggest to you the correct input values, the correct format of the input values. And that's where you really get this reduction in frustration, for example. Like this helps you not have to, why is it not working this time around? Why do I have to tab out, like look up in the documentation, look up on Stack Overflow, where is it? Where is this? Using Copilot can really help you stay in that mindset and just not focus on the exact parameter formatting, but more on how can I use this to achieve the goal that I have. And that's the beauty that I think when you combine the space framework with evaluating developer experiences, this is what you basically get, right? Get better overview.
Yeah. And one thing I like about Copilot is that it also, I don't want to use the word force, but it encourages developers to comment their code, because those are best practices that we learn in uni. But as soon as people are in industry, sometimes they get caught up with just writing code that they don't think about the next person that's going to build on top of their code, and if it's not well documented, it becomes harder for someone who's onboarding to understand what the code does, so yeah, I really love how it's sort of improving the ecosystem, going back to the fundamentals and saying, hey, put in appropriate comments for your code and also write tests for your code. And like I know a few years ago, test-driven development was a thing, right? But there are some people who are not strong at that, and Copilot sort of becomes that pair programmer that says, hey, I can help you write a test, appropriate test cases for your piece of code.
And also, if you look, especially when we are talking about test cases and commenting your code, I don't know if you've seen that actually inside of the GitHub, inside of the Visual Studio Code marketplace, there's GitHub Copilot Labs. So it's the
yes.
You've played it?
I've used it before. I have. It helps with explaining code, especially because Copilot is when you're writing code, and the labs actually help if you're going through code that's already written.
It's a better layer. It's giving you different options using this magic of Copilot, right? And there's a brush, for example, these code brushes, right? When we are talking about commenting code, for example, or making code more secure, in Copilot Labs, we have these little experimental code brushes. So if you can select a code, you can press the code brush, comment this code, and then it actually gives you comments where it thinks you need some. So
one thing I found strange, I know it's outside the scope of our talk today, is that Copilot supports SQL, but the code labs, I realized that it can understand that, okay, this piece of code is SQL and it can probably explain what it does. But when it comes to converting code, I realized it's not yet supported for database languages. It's just traditional programming languages like your Java, your Python, and C#. Like you can actually convert one piece of code from one language to another, but it can explain all code right now. But I found if you want to move from like I don't know, like a certain database query language to another one, it's not yet there. Like I know it's outside the scope of this, but I found it quite
the model is
interesting.
quite flexible. I've not personally tried out converting database languages, but what I've seen from my experience, like the model is extremely flexible and knows a lot more stuff than what sometimes the UI might offer, right? So especially in the Copilot Labs, maybe it's not available in the dropdown, but what I've seen, for example, with a customer-specific language, so they have created their own language for industrial automation. And that's not a part of any training set, because that's super specific industrial code in a language that is not public, right? And when you try to just open a project like this, which Copilot should not have any reference for, but which is still a programming language with a logical structure, right? What Copilot can still do is suggest sensible code that's actually working. So when you try that with a custom language, it just looks at the context, and it will try to get from this context an understanding of the language it's currently looking at. So this is how flexible this model is. So for the database languages, maybe it's not available as a drop-down option in the Copilot Labs, but if you try to write additional code, I'm 89% sure, let's say, that Copilot will give you sensible inputs and suggestions that actually help you with code that it might never have seen before. So
nice.
It's incredible, yes. And one last thing, maybe, if you think about all we've looked at today, right? We've looked at Copilot, we've looked at code spaces, we've looked at security, inner sourcing, and the space framework. These are all different parts of one whole picture, right? In the end, what you want to do is not to say, right now I'm using code spaces. This, I've done everything I can. It's by combining all of these different parts, all of these bricks together, to build this future vision of a developer-centric, developer experience-focused development environment in your company, right? So you can give them code spaces to have this clean and frictionless technical setup. You can give them Copilot to be more frictionless when they're working with new languages and new libraries and create code faster, happier, and stay more in the flow when they're creating that code. But at the same time, you should also maybe use the space framework to look at all of the different metrics and evaluate continuously how you can improve the happiness of the developers, the focus of the developers, and make them more innovative. And at the end, if you combine all of the different parts, you get to be a DevSecOps elite performer. And when we look at these elite performers, the definition is basically companies that utilize the latest technologies, that ship much faster than the others, that innovate much faster. Then we see there is a huge difference between elite performers and the average company. So an elite performer means, for example, you deploy code much more frequently. So this means you're deploying your code into production multiple times a day, not just every couple of months, right? For example, what we also do is the commit time. It means that basically the time from when you commit the first time the new code line to when it lands into production. This is on a matter of hours versus a matter of days, weeks, and months. So this really helps your organization with these changing environments to stay up to date, to always mirror the requirements that you have externally, the business requirements, and put them into your code, put them into your product, and stay more relevant, stay ahead of the curve. And so that's what we really want to propose. Use the latest tools, combine everything into this entire story, developer-centric development, and just innovate faster.
Wow, Max, thank you so much. This was really empowering. And like I said, developer productivity is something that I'm really passionate about, and a subject that I'm continuously learning on. And this session has been very insightful. And I like how different sections of what you've covered were they were adding to that element of developer velocity, whilst keeping the well-being of the developer at the center of the conversation. So this is really, really great. And thank you so much for joining us here and sharing this knowledge with us. It's been incredible. Anything else that's top of mind for you that you want to share with the people who are watching this?
I can only say thank you for watching this and for giving me this space to share what I am really passionate about in software development. Right. One more thing, maybe. Also watch the other videos from my dear colleagues that will be published. You will find some links in the description below. And we are all very curious to hear what you think about what we've presented today. If you have any additional thoughts, maybe a different viewpoint, let us know in the comments. And yeah, we're incredibly excited to hear that.
Thank you, Max. And indeed, we will be adding to the description of the video two webinars that people can view on demand. So one is getting started with inner sourcing. So if you are now very interested in implementing inner sourcing in your organization or introducing the culture of open source within your organization, inner sourcing is it. And we have an amazing talk that was done. We will have the link in the description of this video. And then we also have an introduction to Copilot as well as Code Spaces. You can find the link of that webinar in the description as well. Please, as Max has shared, do let us know what more you want us to take a deep dive in to help you be more productive and be happy as a developer. So from all of us today on Mia Dev Radio, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.